Welcome everyone to our first webinar for the year, coming to you from the Women's Health Research, Translation and Impact Network. I'm Professor Vicky Clifton. I chair the Workforce Development Subcommittee at WHRTN, and I am an enthusiastic participant in the NHMRC Ideas Grant Scheme, but I'm yet to be funded by them. So I think it's going to be very helpful for me as well as everyone else today. Before I get started, I would like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the custodians of the lands on which we live, learn and work, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We especially take this time to recognise and honour Indigenous women who are here, as well as those who have gone before us. We look to their collective wisdom in guiding our work and seek continued partnership as we work together to improve health outcomes for all women living in this land. Today, our speakers all come from Meanjin in Turrbal and Yagara country, and I'm coming to you today from Quandamooka country, which is just outside of Meanjin. So thank you for attending. Many of you are aware of how competitive NHMRC grant scheme is, with only 10% of applicants being funded, and it's a tough scheme to win, but you have to be in it to win it. And today we'll talk about writing an ideas grant and encourage everyone to ask questions at the end. If you think of a question while someone's speaking, please write it in the chat, and we will ask at the end. We have a range of experts speaking on ideas grants today. Dr. Megan Cross is based in the University of Queensland's Research Office, and Megan is an important person in terms of she manages the pre-award team supporting grant submissions, and she helps us get those submissions spot on to submit to the NHMRC. Megan will provide us with tips and tricks of writing an ideas grant. We then have Professor Karen Moritz. Karen is our Associate Dean of Research at UQ. She has a long career in biomedical sciences, and Karen will talk about her perspectives on being competitive in the Ideas Grant Scheme. Karen has been a member of several grant review panels for Ideas Grants in the past, and she has some tips for what catches the eye of a reviewer. And then we have our two EMCRs who have been successful in the Ideas Grant Scheme, Dr. Katrina Moss and Dr. Mathilde Balby. Welcome. And they're going to provide some tips on how they got there. Unfortunately, Sylvia, who we had on the plan today, is unwell and unable to attend, and she's a apology. At the end, I invite you to ask our panel some questions and share your own experience if you like. And we will be emailing out an evaluation as soon as the webinar is over. And we really appreciate it if you could feed back to us, because we want to improve these webinars so that they're helpful for anyone that's interested in applying for grants in the future. So now I'm going to hand over to Megan Cross. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, E. I'm going to share my screen.
And let me just unshare.
I think everyone can see that. Let us know if not. So thank you very much, Vicky, for the opportunity to speak today. Ideas grants are really exciting for me and my team because they expose us to so much exciting research. A bit about me, I am a former postdoc who spent some time as an academic editor and eventually found her way into the research office. So my team work within the central office, and we do spend a lot of time looking at eligibility and compliance, making sure that applications that do go in don't get sunk because of minor details like page limits and formatting stuff. But we also in the UQ Research Office have the advantage of being able to spend some time with our researchers crafting their grants and looking at how the best they can put their case forward to really make their research shine. Because I come from a compliance and eligibility type background, I am going to sort of refer to the guidelines quite a bit. They are, as a former data nerd and a current eligibility and compliance person, they are my lifeline, and I like to cling to them. So I'm going to start by just going over ideas grants, because the idea of what an ideas grant is guides how you should frame your application. So the objective of these is to support innovative research projects that address a specific question. In this case, it's a question that you yourself determine to be of great importance. The anticipated outcomes are that you will perform innovative and creative research, and you're going to hear those two words many, many times today. The ideas grants are exciting because they fund researchers of all career stages. This is not a scheme that looks at your track record or how long it's been since you got your PhD. And it also funds research that is in any area of health and medical research, all the way from discovery through to implementation. In terms of funding, you have access to grants of up to 5 years. You can have a team of 10 people. What's exciting as well is that there is no maximum funding cap. You can apply for the money that you need to do the work that you need to do to make it happen. There is a limit of 2 applications per round, and a limit of on the number of ideas and investigator grants you can hold. I'll touch very briefly on that. And ideas grants amount to about 25% of the medical research endowment account allocation. This is based on the 2024 numbers. We might see something different this year. One thing to note is that ideas grants are not intended to support work that focuses on a clinical trial or a cohort study. The NHMRC has another scheme that is focused around that. As Vicky has already said, ideas grants are fiercely competitive. The success rate hovers around 10%, but exactly what Vicky said, you've got to be in it to win it, and it's well worth going out for the scheme. Now, what types of research are funded by ideas grants? I think we all like to think our research is innovative and creative, and that is exactly what the scheme funds, innovative and creative research across all areas of health. But what does innovation mean in terms of the NHMRC's expectations? And here I go back to the words that they use within the guidelines, and these are the words that I would hope you would use within your proposal. And that is, innovation in this context refers to changing or creating something that's more effective, something that's new, always with impact as the end goal. So depending on which area of health and medical research you work in, this could mean that you're developing or applying something new. You could be reinterpreting, refining, or improving an existing concept, an existing process, an existing technology. Or you might find a new and exciting way to integrate technology or an idea from another field and bring it over to solve a problem within your space. But what does that mean? Well, what research is really funded? Ideas grants are awarded across 4 broad research areas, and when you submit your application, you will be asked to nominate which of these 4 areas you are submitting under. Folks will often ask us if there is an advantage in submitting under one research area rather than the other, particularly if their research could be framed in one of 2 different areas. And if you look at the data of what's been awarded for the last 5 years, you'll see the majority still goes to basic science research, but the funding rates vary across the research areas. There's no one that is more consistently more successful than the others. So if in doubt, go with the area that fits best for your research, because that will get your application in front of a panel who can appreciate the challenges and the innovation of your work. Who is funded by ideas grants? I mentioned that you can have a team of up to 10 people, but looking back over the data for the last few years, team sizes for ideas grants generally don't go all the way up to 10 people. The majority of them have fewer than 5 chief investigators. So these are tight-knit collaborative groups doing some exciting work. The other thing to note about who gets funded is that while the ideas grants do fund researchers at all career stages, generally the lead investigator over the last few rounds has had more than 10 years of research since they finished their PhD. And that is probably because, at least we think, there is an expectation noted within the guidelines that the CIA will have the leadership and the skills to make good of the proposed aims. I say this as I sit in the room with two ECRs who've done an amazing job of getting funding. Anyway, so how are ideas grants assessed? There are 4 assessment criteria. And you'll notice that these focus again on innovation, creativity, having an impact, things like significance. You'll notice there isn't a specific assessment criterion relating to track record, but there is a capability requirement. And so while the assessors will not be looking back across your career at your track record per se, they will be looking to see that the research team have the capability to execute the project. And fortunately, when you apply, the NHMRC provides a grant proposal template where the mandatory headings actually correspond really nicely to these sections. So it makes it really clear which assessment criterion you're dealing with within a specific section. So what does a great grant look like within each of these assessment criteria? This, as you can imagine, varies vastly by field. And so we suggest that when you're trying to benchmark how your grant is going to come off, you might look at the category descriptors that are published each year within the guidelines. The highest score possible is a 7. And so we've taken the text from a 7 and popped it onto this slide for quick and easy reference. You don't necessarily have to meet every single item within this list, but it is a really useful guide to understand what they're looking for as the gold standard ideal that we'd all love to work towards. A brief pause because I come from a research office. The question of whether someone can apply for an ideas grant, not whether you should. Eligibility for ideas grants is fairly simple. To be the lead investigator, all that is formally required is that you have the right to work within Australia for the duration of the grant and that you must remain here for 80% of the funding period. The rest of your research team don't have to be in Australia unless they're wishing to draw salary from the grant. And there is also no requirement that your CIs have a PhD. So it is possible to list your PhD candidates if they are essential and will be making an important contribution to the project. The other thing to be aware of with ideas grants is that the NHMRC does impose a limit on how many you can apply for and hold. And this limit, the magic number here is 2. So you can apply for and hold 2 grants from the ideas and the investigator grants schemes. If in doubt, we're waiting for confirmation at the moment when the 2025 ideas grants guidelines will be released. But if in doubt, we suggest contacting your local grants office to check your eligibility, particularly if you already hold one of these grants. And the NHMRC also provides a really handy eligibility checking tool on their webpage. So if you decide to apply for an ideas grant, what do you actually need to have at hand? So your application will be done online in the NHMRC's Sapphire platform. If it's your first time interacting with Sapphire, we suggest registering early because it sometimes takes a while to get things set up, particularly because registering for an account requires a human sitting at the NHMRC to approve it and actually do the establishment, so it's not automated. Your application in Sapphire will comprise an online form that captures a number of important details about your application, and there'll also be a grant proposal document that you upload to the online form. Before I move on from this, I want to pause and talk about 2 things about the online form. The first is that the online form captures your research team. You'll insert your chief investigator's emails. They will receive an invitation to come on board and join the grant. That confirms that they are good to go, keen to be involved. And it's also very important because if your chief investigators have not accepted this invitation, you will not be able to submit. And I raise it with you because in the research office, I've seen a lot of pain points where people have international collaborators who struggle to get their accounts up and who struggle with the multi-factor authentication. So when you're setting this up, please bear this in mind. The other thing I've highlighted here is the research classification data. This will be part of the minimum data that you enter very early on in the application development. But your research classification data are really important because they are used to appoint the peer reviewers who will look at your application. So think carefully about the keywords you choose and the fields of research you select. Be to ensure that your application goes to the people with the right expertise to understand it. I also get a lot of questions about budget. I know many researchers will look at the maximum budget they can claim from a grant and work to that, but when we don't have a ceiling, where do we stop? So we look back in history. I've offered you some of the average mean amount that's been claimed over the years, but if we look at a split of everything that was funded in the 2023 round, you can see that grants range from over $4 million to below $500,000. And so it's quite difficult to use any sort of benchmark there. You might look within your own field, but the official advice we give UQ applicants is that your budget is here to provide the resources that you need to execute your research plan. So claim the funds that you are going to need to do the project to the best of your ability. Remember also that your assessors are researchers themselves, so they understand how expensive research is, and they may be able to gauge if you're undercosting. When you put your budget into Sapphire, you'll be asked to justify each item, and we recommend doing this both in terms of need and cost. By talking in terms of need, you would link to your aims to show the assessors how every dollar that's invested in the project is actually going to support you to make good of the aims and to produce your outcomes. When I say justifying in terms of cost, it's really just giving your assessors an idea of the cost basis. So if you've picked a consumer remuneration rate, where does that come from? This is also relevant when we talk about salaries. Many people understand that these are costed based on personnel support packages, which are set by the NHMRC. And they can be, I'd argue, quite easy to justify if you've got a defined role for this person. The NHMRC provides descriptions of each PSP in terms of the expertise and the qualifications you would expect a person appointed at that level to have. So if you can relate that level of qualification and expertise to what you're hoping for them to do, you can put forward a really strong justification for each salary. I've mentioned that CIs can request salary, but another thing to note is that if you have associate investigators on your grant, they cannot be paid through the grant. So those are the boring details. Let's talk about the grant proposal, because this is where the fun stuff happens, right? When you're approaching your grant proposal, you're really talking about the what. This is the stuff that gets people excited. This is where you can really show people why your research is amazing. And so there are a few standard points to think about, and I'm going to go through each section of the proposal. So you would start by outlining your research aims and explain what you are planning to do to achieve those aims. You'll offer your hypothesis, give some rationale for why you've decided to go about solving your health problem within that, with using that approach. There's a section where you will detail your study design, and this is where you really get into the nitty-gritty science, talk about your methods, timelines, how you're going to collect data, how you're going to analyze it. And finally, important within the ideas scheme, you need to consider the technical and scientific risks that are associated with your proposal, and there is a dedicated section for this. So I mentioned I'm going to go through each section of the proposal, bar the references, because we all know how to do those. Your research proposal, part A of the grant proposal, tells your assessors what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. The NHMRC provides suggested sections. These are not mandated headings, but they are, I think most people will use them. They're a great way to guide your assessors through. So when approaching this, I have some tips to bear in mind. Consider which broad research area you have nominated within your application. You will have assessors who are within that field, experts within that field, but not necessarily experts on your particular space. And so you will be writing for experts and non-experts within your broad research area. And so we recommend that you start and end your research proposal using everyday language that allows a non-expert assessor to understand what you're going to do and what the impact's going to be without having to find their way through jargon and a lot of science. Obviously, you'd like your assessor to like you. So we recommend offering a pleasant reading experience by being quite clever in how you format your proposal, but also in how you frame your content. So in terms of formatting, it's fairly obvious. We all know what we like to look at. Reader-friendly stuff that has white space. We recommend using subheadings to guide your assessors through. make it easy for them to come back if they want to revisit a section. And also using figures where you can to introduce some visual variety and break up the space. In terms of content, because you're writing for educated non-experts, we recommend simple and direct language where you can avoid jargon, keep the abbreviations to a minimum. I often find myself suggesting to researchers that they are more specific in how they've written something. Specificity adds credibility because it shows that there is something behind a broader claim that you're making. And as you work on your proposal, aim for consistency across all sections. So the timeline that you propose aligns with the work packages that you've set out, which aligns with the budget saying when you're going to be spending the funds. The first page of your research proposal will always include your aims, but it is a really powerful tool to capture your reader's attention and draw them in. So we recommend starting with an overview that will quickly get your message across, particularly if you're using direct and simple language. A non-expert reader can be drawn in and understand where you're going. You'll have your aims on the first page, as I mentioned, and we recommend using boxes and figures so that your assessor doesn't immediately open up to a wall of text. Your first page is also where you can establish consistent visual anchor points. So a heading structure that may have a certain type of shading or a slightly different font, something like that, that will guide your assessor through. And we recommend including on this page a short statement that captures the innovation and the creativity of your proposal. So that will be in the back of your assessor's mind as they go through the other sections. Part A, I suppose after you deal with your aims, you'll talk about the background. The background is the rationale for the research plan. So this is not a section where you do a literature review and you write everything that you know about the field. This is providing a statement of the problem and context for your approach. So you'll talk about the issue, the current state of affairs. This gives people some sense of why we need to care, and it gives you an opportunity to provide evidence that back up your claims. If you have preliminary data, you can use this section to segue into that. But something to note about preliminary data is that the guidelines state that because innovation and creativity may sometimes mean starting from scratch, there is no expectation that you have preliminary results or pilot studies. I'll be really interested to hear from Karen if this is something, though, that assessors do look for. Your research plan, there are guidelines, specific and detailed instructions and suggestions within the guidelines of what you would include here, but this is the meat of the meal. This is where you really get stuck into the science and you talk about what you're going to do. And what we're looking for here is an alignment between the aims you've started off proposing, the methods that you're discussing now, and the outcomes and the impact that you're going to generate by performing this research. So clearly explain this in terms of your aims. Ensure that you've provided sufficient and precise information. Do not assume that your assessor will understand the significance or the importance of something that you're going to be doing here. We like to say make the implicit explicit, and that is remember that because you are carrying and supporting a non-expert reader. Define the interim and expected outcomes, and as you go, if you can mention the members of your team who have the skills and expertise to perform specific aspects of your research, you are subtly addressing the capability criterion without specifically dealing with it in this section. So providing a cohesive picture where all the sections agree. It's also a great idea to reference your team's publications where possible, because that draws on your track record and shows that you already have capability within this area. Next section is a timeline. I won't spend much time on this other than to say this shows thorough and realistic planning. This justifies your grant duration. So please visually give it space, give it room to breathe so your assessor can see what's going on. But also in the background, as you work through this, ensure that it aligns with your budget. If you schedule an aim for a specific year, make sure that check if you need to have a corresponding cost within your budget. The next section in your research proposal is identified risks. And the NHMRC have acknowledged that creative and innovative research comes with risks. And they're okay with that, but they want you to explain how you've thought about risks and potential weaknesses and how you're going to mitigate them. So In this section, you're basically doing a risk assessment the same way you would with a lab or an ethics application. You're talking about what could get in your way and how you're going to deal with it, how you're going to know if it's getting in your way, and how you're going to know that you've successfully overcome it. An interesting thing to be aware of is that you can mention your associate investigators as part of your risk mitigation strategy. And the format for this isn't set, so you can do this as a paragraph or you could do it as a risk table, whatever fits best with your particular application. The last part of your research proposal is an outcomes and significance section. This is shorter than section D, which is a significance statement. This is generally a quarter to a half a page at most. And it's like the conclusion section of a journal article. So you're going to succinctly paraphrase your key selling points about why this problem that you're addressing is important, deliver your outcomes in terms of the context of the significance of your proposal, and then briefly conclude with a statement explaining why your outcomes are going to lead to something that's bigger and better or much improved than what's gone before. Part B is references. We'll move past those. Part C is a one-pager, but it's your innovation and creativity statement. And these are grants that fund innovative and creative research. So it is well worth spending time on this. This is where you're going to explain why your research is special, what differentiates it from the current situation. You'll see the word paradigm shift everywhere. And it's not important that you use the word paradigm shift. It's important that you demonstrate by being specific about what you're going to do and what you're going to achieve, so that your assessors can believe that there is a paradigm shift. So in this section, you'll talk about what's new or what's different about your research, how it's challenging the current situation, and what the novelty of your project is. You might also, depending on the nature of your work, talk about how your discoveries themselves will be novel or transformative, what their importance is, what the paradigm shift is, or what you might be improving by doing this work. Your next one-pager is a significance statement. Very important because it tells your assessors why we care about this project. We've spoken about what's cool about it, why it's novel and inventive, but why should we care? And so we suggest a three-pronged approach to this, and that you start by explaining why you're addressing an issue of critical importance, then talking about how your proposal will lead to important advances, how it's going to have an impact on the health issue that you're dealing with, and importantly, why the solution is needed now, or perhaps why it wasn't possible until now and what you will enable by producing this. So we always end with a positive outlook, referring to impact and what's going to be better. And so you'll talk about what your proposal will generate. The purple wording here about exceptional and extremely significant outputs comes from the guidelines. So you will talk about the publications that you'll produce, but also any flow-on effects from that. And particularly if you work in a field where you might be introducing a policy change or a change in services, those things are really worth mentioning because they show that the research will be adopted and potentially have a broader reach. Finally, you talk about capability, why we should believe that you as a team are the people to do this job. And if you've worked through your research proposal and woven in who's going to be responsible for which sections of the work, this should be fairly easy. So your capability looks both at the capacity of your chief investigator as a leader and also at the capability of the team. So your response will address your CIA's specific leadership and their skills. You'll address your team composition and their combined capability. And what you're looking for when you discuss your team is to show that you have the right people for the right job. So everyone has an important role to play. And because the scheme expects to fund a diverse range of researchers, you will look at the balance within your team. So you would discuss gender, career stage, if you have any researchers who are Aboriginal or of Torres Strait Islander origin, particularly if you're doing research that affects those peoples, and also if you have any involvement with consumers or stakeholders. You're looking to show that you got the right people in the right place. The last thing you might mention in your capability section is the research environment and any other resources you may have access to that'll help you deliver the research. We've also included here the governance and the collaborative structure. This may not be relevant to everyone, but it is something to think about. So some final tips from the nerd in the research office, who will be the person chasing you about page numbers and margins, is that 4 things. So when you think about the research that you're going to propose, creativity and innovation are key, and risk is expected. So my suggestion is that you don't default to the safe option automatically. The NHMRC mentions this in their guidelines. And what's more important is pursuing something novel and going in with a plan for how you're going to mitigate your risks. When you choose your team, keep it tight. Not everyone needs to be on your team. What you need to know is that you've got the right people in the right roles. And also, side plug for the research office, please get your team on board early. In terms of your budget, we suggest not playing the game. Request what you need at a realistic cost and justify it well. You are writing for a team, for a group of academic assessors who know that it's tough. And finally, as you work through your grant proposal, focus on clarity, both visual clarity for your reader and conceptual clarity in getting your idea across. So ensure that your reviewer can find the information that they need when they need it. I understand I'm going to hand over to Karen to share her perspective as a peer reviewer. So I thought I would include a final slide to show you what the peer review process looks like. Your peer reviewers will be identified through your research classification documents. Your application will be assessed by up to 5 people, and each assessor will independently score and provide individual comments. Any outliers or unusual budget items get flagged with the NHMRC and followed up. And then the scores and the comments from your assessment panel will be used to generate a ranked list of scores that then is used to generate funding recommendations that are approved by the minister. I've included, as usual for pre-award, a list of resources to consult. These are all specifically NHMRC resources because each person's research office will have different resources. I mention these because many people know about the guidelines, but the peer review guidelines are also very helpful because they allow you to see what your reviewer is going to be looking for when they review your application. And the NHMRC also publishes a document detailing the key characteristics of ideas grants applications. So there is documentation to help.
I'd like to introduce Professor Karen Moritz. She is Associate Dean of Research for the Faculty of Health Medicine and Behavioural Sciences. And Karen's going to talk about grantmanship and the perspectives you get as a reviewer of ideas grants. So welcome, Karen, and thank you for making it.
Well, as Vicky said, I was last year on the Ideas Grant Review process. I've previously sat on lots of other grant review panels, but it was actually my first time on the Ideas Grants. And I'll be honest to say it was one of the harder, I think, sets of grants to assess because there's an amazing array of things. And yeah, some areas, you know, people are doing really, really well across the board. We always used to say as grant assessors, there was, you know, you could often find the bottom 30% of grants weren't of a great standard, and I think that's becoming less and less. So Megan, I appreciate your comments. I think we need to focus on every aspect. We can't let one just slip by because it will mean a reviewer's actually looking out, I hate to say it these days, for something potentially to take your grant down or not score it as well. So look, I thought I'd run through how it actually felt to be a reviewer on the other side. The first part is that you get the email from Sapphire that says you've got to declare your conflicts of interest and suitability. And this is something they've had in place for a little while now because they use their keywords to line you up with grants that they think you should be able to do. But sometimes they come in and you look and you think, oh, gosh, there's no way I can really review that. So that first thing is, you know, are you, yes, confident you could act as an assessor for this? Sort of moderate. It's not my primary area of expertise, but I could probably still do it. Limited. Well, I'd prefer not to, and then absolutely no. And I think just again, picking up on Megan's points, in your synopsis and your keywords, making sure that they are done in a way that can appeal to a group of assessors, because in actual fact, you want people to be excited about your grant. When I read a synopsis, if I'm in that moderate to limited section, sometimes I look and I think, oh gosh, I'm not a yes, but I'd really like to read this one. So I'm going to put myself as this moderate because I might be more likely to get it. Whereas if I read something that's pretty boring, I might put more limited or no. So really think about that synopsis as a way to attract perhaps a set of reviewers that will have varied opinions about your grant, or have various expertise perhaps. One of the things I found interesting is declaring conflicts of interest. Obviously, they're very clear in some areas. You've collaborated with people, you've published with them, you work with them, etc. You know them through your own institution, which is often the case in my position. But AIs are considered low, even if they're quite close. And last year I had two that I said, oh, I think I'd need a ruling. I think I'm a bit close to an AI. And I was told I could go ahead and review. So as you're thinking about your team, I think those decisions about AIs and CIs, just bear that in mind. You don't want everyone on your grant so that there's no one left in your field to review if you're in a pretty specialist area. So have a think about that. There may be times when it's actually better not to have that person as a CI, but maybe as an AI, because it may change the scope and scale of people that can actually review your grant. So when they first came out, I had to make a declaration about approximately 80 to 85 grants. And I know that NHMRC are hoping that you'll say that you're yes or moderate in at least probably 30 or 40 of them, because they are already pre-selected to your kind of area. Thanks, Megan. So you declare that on about 80, and then the next stage is scoring application. So I got about, I think last year, about 17 or 18 to review. I know some colleagues got a few less and some got a few more, but I think you were right on the mark, Megan. It is around that 20. And again, just working through those various criteria, everything that Megan said as I came online, I could really relate to. Many of us are slightly out of discipline. Although I would put my hand up for anything in kind of women's reproductive health, I also get a bit of the high blood pressure ones sometimes, etc. On the reproductive kind of panel, you also might get a bit of men's health that I think, oh, well, I can still relate to that. Men's reproductive infertility, etc., might still come through to that kind of keywords of being reproduction. But no way would I feel as comfortable reviewing some of those grants. So just remember, I might still get them, but I am out of discipline. And so that whole thing of the jargon and the abbreviations. I can't stress highly enough, everyone says it every time at these panels, how crucial that first page is. If you haven't got a hook and hooked me by the end of that first page, you've already almost gone into my kind of near unfundable category straight off. It's so critical. Conversely, if I've read that first page and I think, wow, this is important work, and wow, it's got a pretty simple plan, or maybe a quite complex plan, but a diagram that explains that to me, then wow, I'm excited to read the rest, and I'm looking for everything that I can find to score this grant highly. So if you've got people who are willing to look at your grant, but say, I've got not much time, just ask them to look at the first page, because if you can get that right, not saying you don't need to pay a lot of detail to the rest, you do, but that is where you can win or lose a reviewer straight off. That second category, innovation and creativity, I really found actually the hardest part to score. I kind of, think I know quite good science when I see it, think about the team and the capability, but the innovation and creativity had to be something that was really spelled out for me on some occasions. And if it wasn't, it was easy to kind of do that thing of, I don't quite get it. And we all say, gosh, I hate that reviewer who didn't quite get it. But it's easy to be that reviewer on this section. So work hard, be clear, The innovation might just be that you're taking a technique or a concept and using it differently. And the people that were honest and upfront about that, I bought it. I said, gosh, you're not overselling. You're not saying that this is, as Megan said, a paradigm shift. That's, really not a paradigm shift, but it's actually taking something that's well established and that you're perhaps really good at and applying it in a different setting. So again, that's a section that I think was done poorly and well. And again, it's probably one that I think we need to be all working on and saying, what are those factors that do work? I've talked to other reviewers and they equally, I think, struggle in that section. Next one, Megan. Thanks. Okay, we've gone through this one. The thing I just wanted to say about significance, gosh, it's hard. Is one disease more important than another? Because everyone says their own condition, disease, the thing they want to work on is the most important. And I very much view that, okay, I'm starting with these are all really important, but you've got to make a case as to why you've got something that will actually solve that problem or make an impact change. So that's where I saw the significance. Not that your disease was important, but that you had that approach, that team that could answer that question and make a difference. So that's where I scored highly, where all those elements came together. So again, as Megan said, it's not simply about that page where you're telling me the significance. I've got that from the whole grant that, gosh, these people are going to be able to do it and it's going to make a difference. The capability, feasibility really plays into this. So I always think the good grants are ones that have, good science, but a research team that matches the science that they want to do. But I need to know that it's a team that's going to, in the time they say, achieve the aims. And for me, that was often a bit of a deal breaker. This is a team that even with an experienced, perhaps quite experienced researcher was going somewhere. Yes, you can have a new idea. And I agree, Megan, you didn't really need preliminary data or pilot data all the time, but gosh, you would have had to really nail me in this section that you could do it. If you didn't have that preliminary data, I wanted to know that you had every method, the expertise in terms of that team that was still going to be able to do this work. I think we've already talked about team mix and skills, so we can probably move on, but really back up that thing. I looked for that diversity. Many of the grants I read were led by, level B postdoctoral fellows, Bs and Cs, and they actually articulated that team around them, that there was mentorship and support. They were leading it. This was part of their leadership journey, but they had the necessary people around to cover off on any methodological or other expertise that they might need. Next one. So as we've scored those grants, there is one final step that NH and MRC, and I was a bit shocked when it came to me, please have a look what other reviewers have said. And this has come about, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, because we all work offline and then we load up our comments, and then occasionally the wrong comments come into someone's grant. And they're talking about, male reproductive system, you're going to solve this. And it's like, oops, no, this was actually one about preeclampsia or something. So we are asked to go in, check that our own comments and those of other people relate to the grant. We can't change our scores. We can't do anything. But I think for particularly people reviewing for the first time, it's a reminder of, perhaps how those more experienced assessors might actually make comments that are appropriate and relevant. And I think there's a good learning procedure for any of you who might be like me on that side of reviewing, just to see how other people reviewed and looked at a particular grant as well. Next one. Okay, I think we've been through much of this. This is just a bit more generic stuff. If you have it though, find other people's successful grants. Always really useful to see those sections that I said are hard. So not just a successful grant, because we get scores in each kind of section. Have a look and say, yeah, this is someone who scored really well in that innovation and creativity. That was where, perhaps my grant didn't score so well. What is it about that one that made it look good? And as we said, this scheme's a little bit more challenging around that honest conversations. It's harder to actually assess sometimes which ones a reviewer will really love. We're a little bit better, I think, doing it with fellowships, but these are a bit tricky. Now, I know I'm nearly out of time, Megan, so we'll zoom through the last couple so others have got time. I think I've just got my top 5 tips. You can read them there. We've talked about lots of it. Never too early to start writing grant, but it can be too late. So get in early. And again, we always hear about that grant that's in for the 3rd or 4th time and it finally gets up. I used to have a rule 3 strikes and you're out. I think if you've tried 3 times with a very similar grant, you do need to do something major to change it. But it still might have the same premise and the same ideas, but you might have found a new technique that you can incorporate or something that would take it to a new level. And I know that there's a lot of junior people online, so you do have to learn to love that grant writing process. It's a big part of your life. And we'll zoom through the last couple because I'm sure these are available. We've talked about that. All the bits matter, including that synopsis and keywords. And I can't, again, say that as an assessor, you know, that budget thing, to be honest, you were only really asked to comment on budget if you felt there was something inappropriate too high. You know, I didn't spend a lot of time on budget. We used to sweat it out. Now we don't. If it's reasonable and we know what things cost, there won't be a question. And finally, I think just the one I'll pick out from this one in particular is avoid that overly pushing translation, I think, in your significance and outcomes. Many people feel in a basic science grant they have to push that. There's many ways to translation, and they don't all have to be those clinical outcomes. So don't over push your basic science down that route if that's what you do, because many of in ideas grants, we realise that they're a long way off that.
Karen, greatly appreciated. I was just writing down some tips myself. Okay, and now I'm going to hand over to Katrina Moss. And Katrina, you're going to talk about the IDEAS grant that you received.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think we are running short of time, so I'm going to skip over some of what I had written down, but I lead an ideas grant that's aiming to improve psychosocial support for people who are doing IVF fertility treatment. And that was born out of my own experience. I did multiple rounds of IVF and it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I was doing a PhD on coping and stress at the time. And so I knew there was a whole body of research out there and none of that was getting through to patients. And I just kind of went, I'm a researcher, something needs to be done about this, and it looks like it's going to have to be me. So that's where my research program came from. I'd ever been a CIA on a grant, and it's the first time this particular grant had been submitted anywhere. And I'm not saying that to boast, I feel like it's really cool, but I'm saying that because I never thought as an EMCR this would happen for me, and it did. And maybe you feel the same way. So it can happen. So don't let that fear hold you back. And I also didn't have a lot of papers, and that's why an ideas grant was a really good fit for me compared to something like an investigator grant. So in terms of tips for success, was based on my experience. So it was consumer driven, and I had identified the need from within the health system. So it was a genuine need, a real gap. And I think, you know, our assessors saw the genuine nature of that. I also had been working on the idea for about 3 years in the background. So I was really across the literature, across the people. I'd identified my dream research team. Still can't believe they all said yes. I'd also had the opportunity to be on other grant applications with Professor Geeta Mishra, and that was a really great learning experience in terms of how to craft a grant and how to wrangle investigators. I got an enabler grant from the School of Public Health, and that helped me to do some further consultation with IVF patients and do a tiny little pilot. I also borrowed successful ideas grants from the UQ Grants Library, and that really helped me to understand what does this successful grant look like in terms of the formatting and the use of colour and the type of headings that they used and the style of the writing. So that was hugely helpful. I had a lot of great input from the school and from Central with the research development people and the grants people, and that was hugely useful. And I think what also really helped me is that I looked up the old guidelines and I started writing my grant about 7 months before the call even opened. So I had a really long lead-in time. When they released the new guidelines, I had to tweak mine a bit, but not very much at all. Like ideas grants don't change much year to year, and that means you can get started and chip away at it rather than having to hastily throw something together in 3 months. I also did get really lucky. Like the assessors that I had really understood what we were trying to do, made some really lovely comments about how much it was needed and that they really wished us success. So luck definitely played a role, but I had already done a whole lot of hard work over several years in order to take advantage of that luck. Yeah. All right, I'll stop there.
That's excellent. Thanks, Katrina. And I'm sure people are thinking of questions for you. Mathilde,
Yeah.
please share your experience.
Yes, I will start by sharing the screen. I
Yep.
suppose you can all see it, right?
We
Yes.
can.
Great. So, so I lead the neuromodulation and homeostatic processes lab here at the Queensland Brain Institute, and my lab works on finding strategies to restore function following the occurrence of a stroke, which is something that I've been working on since my PhD. During my PhD, I was looking at the vascular aspect of restoring function after stroke, while during my postdoc, I was looking at the neuronal component. And in my grant, I try to combine both expertise that I had acquired over the years. So the, yes, great. So the grant was about stroke, which is a leading cause of death and disability worldwide. And the point of the grant was really highlighting an issue that was not, there is still a gap, which is the fact that a large percentage of stroke survivors experiences chronic impairments of the upper limb motor skills. And the only available treatment is basically movement-based therapies. And being that the only option, it's a bit, it does not work for everybody. And also the effectiveness of the therapy determines if you are even able to go back home and live a life independently. So and we do preclinical work, so we work in animal models. And in this grant, we basically combined motor tasks, so behavior, brain stimulation, and computational neuroscience to determine optimal stimulation parameters. So we were trying to target something that is not done very often, which is individualized treatments. We combined that with stimulation, and we did implement some sort of closed loop stimulation, so something a bit more risky, but also innovative at the same time. Generally speaking, the grant, I try to be as simple as possible. It needs to be written in a very simple way, assuming that the people that are going to read it, the reviewers, are not necessarily experts in the field. So I try to have the aims clear, nicely structured, and independent from each other, so that if one aim was risky, the project does not fall apart. We heard already about the importance of the creativity and the significance statement. What you will achieve or try to achieve with the grant needs to be meaningful. And I think this is something very important. The team has to be just right. There is no purpose in adding many people on the team if their contribution is not relevant to the grant. In this idea, we were in three. We were only 3 people. But they all had specific expertise and a specific role in the project. Also, you want people in your team that is fun to work with whom you can brainstorm and you are excited about sharing, your findings and the interpretation of the findings. At least this was extremely important for me. And something that I really want to emphasize, because again, is what drove me, is the fact that the project that you're proposing needs to be something that you really are excited about. It requires commitment, and it also requires a lot of drive. So if the research that you're proposing is something that is close to your heart, something that you are passionate about, I do believe that this will be perceived by the reviewer. And at least this is what drove me while writing the grant. I know we are out of time, so I left here my email address. If you guys have any question, please reach out. I'm always happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Mathilde. That was wonderful and greatly appreciated. I think, does everyone have time for 10 minutes worth of questions? Yeah. We have a question for Katrina already. Katrina, how was your study different to a cohort study? So how did it get through an ideas grant scheme when it sounds like it's a cohort study?
Yeah, I think it can be confusing figuring out which scheme to apply for. And I probably could have written this as a cohort study, but I think why it was particularly suitable for an ideas grant, I did get a chance to sort of give an overview of what we're doing in the grant, but at least a third of our time is actually focused on translation. So we're collecting evidence from people doing a cycle, but the main focus is actually we're going to turn that evidence into an online intervention for people to use while they're doing a cycle. And so I think given the very big emphasis on translation, it was a big whack of the funding and it's a really big proportion of the project time. And, if we get that model of care up and running, there's nothing else like it in Australia, and there's nothing available lots of places overseas as well. And so that also helped it to fit within the ideas grant scheme.
Yeah, because it's sort of a new idea, but
Very
not
much.
really tested.
Yeah. But if I hadn't had all that translation, then yes, it probably would have fitted quite well into the cohort studies one. Yeah.
Mathilde, I wanted to ask you, who reviewed your grant before submission? Did you actually have any external reviews done?
Yeah, so that was the second time I submitted the grant. So it had already gone through one round of revisions from the actual assessors. And then we do have internal internal support teams that do read the grant. Specifically between PIs, we do read each other's grants, and that's invaluable, especially if you get feedback from people with much more experience. That's good. I have been in Australia and applying for grants for a bit. That's invaluable. The kind of comments, how to refine your questions even. I think that's very, very important.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Sina. My background is biomaterials and I am an ARC DECRA fellow. I have a pretty great, so I think, idea, but I keep getting told to get someone with an NH and MRC track record to lead the grant. What should I do? Karen, I'm going to put that one to you.
Sina, look, I think if you've got a DECRA, you've shown yourself to be a strong researcher. So your track record's probably pretty good. And I'm apologising, my computer's saying my internet's unstable. So if I suddenly go off and come back on, that's what's happened. What I would do would be to seek out some people in the NH and MRC space, depending where you are, and pitch that idea to them and say, if this came to you on an NH and MRC grant panel, what would you think? Look, we totally respect that many people are lucky enough to be able to flip between ARC as that basic discovery and flip into the medical side as well. So I think you've proven yourself as a performer. And I would say if your project is medically orientated, even though it's basic science or discovery science, go for it.
Thanks, Karen. Megan, I've got a question for you about how important is that synopsis in Sapphire?
Erin has sort of addressed this partly in what she's spoken about, that the synopsis forms part of the minimum data that you put in Sapphire a few weeks ahead of the final submission of the application. And it's one of the things that's used to appoint your assessors. So as Karen, a structured synopsis that really captures the project that's exciting is more likely to connect you with a good peer reviewer. The other thing is that you have a synopsis and you also have a plain English summary that is sometimes called a media summary. That's what will go out into the public space if you're funded. So it's well worth investing some time in how those are written.
Thanks. Have we got any other questions from our audience? Because I don't want to take up all of your opportunities. Does anyone have any questions? All right, I'm going to keep going then. Katrina, what was your first page of your grant application like? Was it colourful? Were there boxes and figures and
Yeah,
fewer words?
yeah, I had a diagram on my first page. I'm very into making documents look beautiful. So I drew my diagram. I think I used the program Venngage. So it wasn't, like a Word document that I'd done in PowerPoint. It looked different. It looked eye-catching and engaging. I used the same color scheme in my diagrams as I did in my headings and subheadings all through my application. And I also had a really clear statement on that front page about what the aims were, why it was exciting. And on that front page, I think it's really important to use different language for different purposes. So when I write my media summaries, for example, I don't use academic language. And on my front page, I didn't use academic language there. I wrote that more in like persuasive, media-oriented community sort of language, like, hey, I've got this really cool idea. Let me tell you a bit more about it. Not that casual, but then the rest of the application was much more sciencey academic language, but not that first page, because you also had to keep in mind academics, like we're so crazy busy, right? So often you're reviewing these grants on your evenings, on your weekends. If you get half an hour between a meeting, you might start doing a grant. Make it easy for people. So make it easier on their eyes, make it easy for them to read. And I also think if it looks pretty, like it's easier for people eyes to follow it through as well.
Excellent, thank you.
And I spent a huge amount of time on that first page. Yeah, getting it right.
Matilda, how much time did you spend writing the first version of your grant? Did you start before the call for submissions or?
Yeah, I had to, especially because English is not my first language, so it takes me extra time to get the sentence right and get the feedback that I needed. And I knew that I had to do it in advance because everybody gets busy. So, you also don't want people you don't want to bother people, right? So definitely, I would say, and I mean, the first version was very, very different. The first grant I submitted was very, very different than the second one, which, I mean, overall, I would say it's more than a year, right? Not continuously, of course, but between the first time I sent it in and the first version and all the comments, the feedback, very long time in the making. Yeah.
So that pre-planning becomes really, really important. You can't just have an idea and start to put it on paper at the call for grant applications. Definitely not.
And sorry, can I just add, I think that's an advantage of the Ideas Grant Scheme. Like the MRFF calls for funding come out, you've got like 2.5 or 3 months to throw your grant together and get it in. Ideas grants aren't like that. You can have a long lead time. And I think it really helps. And I was I was a peer reviewer of grants, not last year, the year before. And you could really tell when people had thrown things together at the last minute. So you don't have to do that with this scheme. So be kind to yourself and give yourself more time and start it early.
Definitely, definitely. Karen, is there a level of luck in people who get hold of your grant and review it and then make it fundable? Oh, she's frozen. You back? Katrina, while we're waiting for Karen to come back, can you name the visual tool that you used?
Yeah, it's called Vengage. And I think UQ has a subscription to that. And I do a lot of my design work. So even sometimes graphs that I put in my journal articles, I do them in Vengage rather than in a stats program or in Excel.
Okay. Vengage. Do you want to just type it into our chat? Someone's asking how it's spelt.
Yes, I don't know if everyone can see our chat, but it's VENNGAGE.
Thank you. All right. I think we've lost Karen. And I think one of the things that I was going to say is that there is a level of luck involved in who are the reviewers that end up with your grant, and if they really want to see it funded, they do have to mark it quite high in order for it to be competitive on a panel. And that's one of the things that you keep in mind, is that your grant might not get funded, but because there's something wrong with it, it just might not get funded because the pool of grants that your group of reviewers were looking at were slightly better. And I think it does bode well for going again and again. So we've had our 10 minutes of questions. And I'm going to say thank you so much to all of our panelists for devoting your time to today. I found it very helpful for myself personally. And our webinar will be up on YouTube for people who would like to view it again. And please don't forget to respond to our evaluation email so that we know how to pitch our webinars appropriately for our audience. So thank you, everyone. And we will have other webinars coming up, so keep an eye out. We have one every month this year. Thank you, and we'll see you later.